Welcome to the Joyful Nourishment Podcast. This is a podcast about our relationship with food and eating, body image, eating disorder recovery, mental health, and more. I am your host, Lynn Thorstensen, a registered nutrition therapist and body image coach based in the west of Ireland. And I'm so glad that you're here. So, hi and welcome again to the Joyful Nourishment podcast. And today I'm here with Stephanie Michele, whose work I have really been admiring for a long time on Instagram. And I think she is one of these people who have this incredible gift of putting very nuanced stuff in a beautiful way in a very limited space that Instagram offers for these small little squares. So I'm really looking forward to have a conversation with you today, Stephanie. But before that, so a little bit about Stefanie. She is a binge eating, recovery, and body image coach, specializing in helping people overcome food and body image issues. And she holds degrees in human development psychology and occupational therapy with a certification in integrative health coaching and intuitive eating. And intuitive eating counseling, I should say. And she is currently working towards her certification in somatic experiencing. However, she considered her lived experience of recovery her most valuable asset, and she lives in New Jersey with her husband and 3 daughters. And I will link to all of your bios and Instagrams and social media websites at the bottom of the show notes. So thank you for being here, Michele.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you for thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. When I read your content and like you kind of, I think you name stuff that I feel both personally and professionally to feel it really lands in a way that feels like truth for me. But often that I'm kind of go, yeah, that makes so much sense, but I wouldn't necessarily be able to name it the way you can do so well. So, but I suppose I always start often with my guests, it's like finding out like what brought you to this work, what is your background, and you did mention in your bio that you have lived experience as well. So would you like to share a little bit about kind of your journey?
Yeah, sure. So I'm 40. How old am I now? I'm 45 years old now. And when I was 15, I developed an eating disorder that came off the heels of body image issues that I was dealing with in childhood, kind of, the emotional turbulence of childhood and things I didn't necessarily recognize were going on for me at the time, but that manifested in an eating disorder, and anxiety and depression and things like that. And I really struggled with that for 25 years it was. And I tried everything and I read every book and if there had been social media, I would have devoured every post and, listened to every podcast. But I went to therapy and I tried, and I was always, my life's mission really was trying to recover. That was really what I identified as my life's purpose, really. I went through periods of, like I said, anorexia, but binging, restricting, binging, purging, orthorexia, and never really understood how to get around it, what it was about, what I needed to do differently. I just didn't know. And so when I was about 40 years old, I had just started learning more about the all-in approach. I didn't really learn about intuitive eating. That wasn't a term that I was familiar with at that time. And maybe that was for the better, to be honest. But I did learn about all-in recovery, and it was so radical. And just for the benefit of listeners, like just kind of completely turning every food rule on its head, and abandoning ideas of how small my body needed to be and what kinds of things I needed to be eating to be healthy or responsible, and like just radically disregarding it, really. And I want to talk about like that. That's not for everybody. But that's what I ended up doing. And within a year, I was, for the first time in my entire life, not binging or restricting or having I wasn't symptomatic with food. And it has been that way for the past, we're going to come up on 6 years this spring. So I ended up becoming a coach because I was so passionate about all of the things that I learned and the things I was putting together and all those dots I was connecting that I had never been able to do in traditional forms of therapy.
Thank you for sharing that. And like, it's really interesting. Like, do you think, like, what do you think was the kind of like the point? Do you think it was like because you were ready to hear that message, or do you think it was because you hadn't come across this kind of approach before,
Mm,
or because you were still holding on to
yeah,
if I can only do this if my body looks a certain way, which I feel
yeah,
a lot of people kind of
yeah.
holds onto that.
Well, what's interesting is that later, so like even just a couple of years ago, I went back into some old emails between I forget what I was actually looking for, but I found these emails that existed between my therapist then, or this is going back 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And I found these emails between my therapist, and apparently I had tried this before. I didn't even remember it, but I have some emails from 2016 where I was, writing to my therapist and saying, it's really working. Not having rules around food is like, I can't believe how different this feels. I haven't binged in a week. I haven't binged in 2 weeks. Like, and I was going on and on. And then I got to this point in the email series where like, apparently things had been going well. And then all of a sudden there's this email to my therapist. I binged, I crashed. I don't know what's wrong with me. I went into this major despair mode. And at the end of that email, I said, I just can't do this. My body refuses to cooperate with me. My body won't stay small enough to let me do this, which told me a lot about what my mindset was at that time, which was still kind of like I liked the idea. The ideas resonated with me, but I still had this kind of caveat that my body needed to still be within a certain range. And if it wasn't, well then you can't do it.
Yeah.
And like that's not that, then it's not working. And so that was really interesting for me to find because I was like, okay, there was probably a building readiness for a while, but it was that piece that kept me stuck. And it wasn't until 2019 when I think it was a bit of social media influence that was talking about body neutrality as a term and understanding that some people in the world out there that I didn't know in real life, but were writing about it on Instagram, were kind of throwing the ideas of social body standards and norms to the wind and defying cultural norms. And that idea was new at that point. And I do believe it gave me something different because if you don't have anyone around you kind of like to look to say like, is this okay? Like, is this something that we can actually do? Then you don't do it because it feels it's you're one fish swimming upstream against, a current. And I think it gave me some confidence with which to get a bit of a stronger foothold. And also that some people had done it before me and I could look to them and say, like, you made it through, like you did this, this is doable. And I think I needed that. So I do believe social media played a role. And the books and the ideas that were coming out at that time gave me some
Mm.
confidence in it.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because I've been thinking about that even from my own personal experience and like how I eat now, or and what you say resonates in terms of it's like I had to let go of like that my body would not change or that it has to be a certain way in order to really kind of be in a space of like choice like all the time.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
not to be like if I'm eating, and I was thinking, oh, like if I'm eating something sweet today, if I'm eating a piece of cake, then I'm not necessarily feeling like I have to have chocolate that day, but I probably do have sweet stuff every day. But it's like,
Yeah.
because it's like, well, it doesn't matter. And there's none of this like, I should feck it, I blew it. So I might as well keep going. Like, it's just like that
Yeah.
doesn't exist because it's like what is like maybe what these normal people, the ones that never kind of are concerned about what their body looks like. So they eat food, they like it, and then they just get on with it. It's not like
Yes.
this other thing. But that was kind of part of, I mean, this segues into the conversation that I was hoping for us to have. And then also I do want to talk about the work that you do around binge eating, nervous system, and sort of bringing the somatic practices into the work. But that piece, what you said from your story in 2016, where you're like, you'd been trying it, and then you got to a point where it's like you had another binge, and it's like, I can't do this. my body isn't kind of working with me. And I think that is, I wanted to have this conversation because Zoe posted about it on Instagram, but also because I think that's actually more common than, we think. And whether that you see it in your private practice and you're working with somebody and you're some sessions in and they're like, I can't do it because my body's changing, or because it just feels out of control, or I can't, it's not landing, or it feels too chaotic. Or when people are trying to do it on their own, maybe even more so, like they read an intuitive eating book and they kind of go, all permission to eat all foods, and they sort of like, this is wonderful, until you get to a point where it's like, oh no, it's just too scary, and then they just drop it and go back. And you had some really interesting points of why that might happen for people. So could we kind of talk about that a bit more?
Well, it's interesting that post. I think, I articulated four of the main things I see of why that doesn't work for someone, but that doesn't even include kind of a different subset of people for whom like there's just not a readiness yet, and or that we've gotten the message of what intuitive eating is, or non-diet approaches is like, kind of, we have a misconception of that. So that's even a separate piece. And that is actually the most common. I find that when people come to me, there is this idea that not dieting anymore or intuitive eating means an all-in approach, or it means you just eat whatever you want because you thought about it or because you can. And I find that with people who identify as like food permitters, so people who tend to be more like they're not identifying with restriction as much. They're not on that side of I think there's like binge restrictors and then there's like binge permitters. And the permitters tend to come with more of an idea of like, this is just about sort of giving me permission to binge. And that's not what this is. That's not what recovery was for me. And I was not of that subset. So for me, this approach worked because I really understood the assignment, so to speak. And I didn't want to use it as like I wasn't going unconscious with the food, and I wasn't using it as permission to check out on myself, which a lot of times will happen. And I think also there's the readiness factor, but even among the people who might have a readiness or who are sort of looking at this as a way of healing their relationship with food and not as an excuse to binge. There are these other factors that sometimes come in, and one of the biggest ones is trauma. And this was something I started to notice more as I worked with people one-to-one, because I thought that everyone would go through it the way I did. And I assumed, no idea. I thought everybody felt like me and everybody came into it like me and everybody was a binge restrictor and everybody. But what I was finding was that in the case of people who had significant histories of trauma and or active states of having trauma response that they still felt quite helpless in, and their nervous systems were still reacting to, this idea of permission to eat and or just the weight gain was basically a signal to the nervous system that they were in great danger. And I'm not saying that I think all of us have a little of that, because when our body gains, that's not acceptable in the world. I mean, as we well know, right? This is not okay. And there is going to be an alarm bell that goes off when we gain weight, and probably no matter who you are. But in the cases of trauma, it was overwhelming the empowerment of the act. It was like, when I was recovering, it was like doing this was the empowerment. It was me taking my power back, taking my agency back. For some people, it is felt the opposite way, and it has felt like it is taking your agency away, because if dieting and controlling one's body size is the only way we've ever learned to tolerate the overwhelm of emotion that comes with trauma, we've taken away somebody's coping mechanism and they've got nothing in its place. So the importance of doing trauma work alongside of an approach like this became really evident to me. And that's what led me to become certified in somatic therapy, because that is beyond cognition. It's beyond just that choice, like all right, I want to do this. I want to do this. It sounds right. I've listened to all the podcasts. But when push comes to shove, the nervous system is reacting in a completely different way and communicating emergency state to the body. There's got to be a different way of handling that. So I think that that's something, it's something that I learned to say as a disclaimer, on my on Instagram posts and things like that, because I think there's a lot of people who are in that position, who are reading this and you're reading about this and they're unguided and they're sort of kind of going into it and wondering why they feel like they're drowning.
Yeah.
When really it's a reflection of the nervous system's fear.
Yeah, and I've never heard anybody, like I've definitely witnessed this with clients where, things are going well and then, maybe weight gain happen or something and it just they just weren't able to tolerate enough and they would exit out then of the work. And then I suppose now thinking back, knowing that there would be a trauma history there and sort of not, I suppose, like understanding that this can happen, I think is really helpful both for people, but it was for practitioners working in this space that
Yeah.
actually we need to watch out for this because this can very well happen and it may not look the way you think, right?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
in how people are responding to that.
Yeah, I've got some clients who, like when their body starts to gain weight, it's, if they've got a history of something like sexual trauma, right? It's kind of like that is the origin story of autonomy and lack and like a breach and a violation of one's own will. And so when the body does something against our will, or it does something that is perceived, or even just a body growing and becoming more visible, getting more curves, getting more sexually attractive. It goes beyond even just what we can, we call a lot of body image content puts it on vanity, or it feels like it's on vanity or like just simply the aesthetic. But sometimes it's like the felt sense of being more exposed, and that can be an inherent threat in the self. And I think that we don't necessarily know, we're not aware of that. Like it's very subconscious, a lot of that. So all we, and clients might be thinking, what's wrong with me? I just don't have the resilience. I don't have what it takes. I just must be too vain for this. I hear that a lot. My ego won't get out of the way. And it's often much more layered than that. And that it can feel very isolating to somebody who's trying to do this and feeling like they just can't. And also to hear voices kind of saying like, this is what you should be doing. This is how you do it. And that can also feel like a directive, not a choice. And that's where this all comes down to is choice, really. And having this come from ourselves. And if we're recovering for the sake of, society, or because we felt like it's the right thing to do, or for a family, or whoever, then it's not necessarily going to work that way.
No, I think ultimately the desire has to be from within oneself, and I think that comes also back to sometimes that readiness. It can take years, or people do a certain amount of work, or like they come from a restrictive eating disorder, it morphs into something else, and you might manage fairly well until you get to a place where it's like this still feels like a half-life,
Yeah.
and you might be ready to, because again, what you're talking about, like those, like the food rules and the dieting, or even the restricting binging, it creates that safe container. It's like that
Hmm.
boundary that kind of keeps
Yeah.
things contained. And and I think about this as well when, when we work with binge eating. And so it's like, like with to never take away the food as an option, right? To
Yes.
self-soothe or whatever, because it's like if you were a child and your teddy bear was keeping you safe, it's like you'd be whipping away that teddy bear and say, "Good look
Yeah.
now, manage on your own."
Yes.
And
And
that's
that's
cruel.
another, exactly. And it's also, I think, a part of the misconception. I think, especially when it comes to binge eating, not even just, well, yeah, I think with binge eating, this idea that recovery equals no longer binge eating equals you've taken something away from me. And I remember feeling like I don't like there was almost like a part of me that didn't want to stop binge eating because I felt like it was a sacrifice, like it would be sacrificing something that felt really comforting to me. For example, I'm an introvert. I don't like to have a full calendar all the time. A lot of times, I think what my binges did for me were it kept me, gave me an excuse to stay home. It was like, oh, you know, if I hated my body so much that day, or if I felt so uncomfortable in it, I wasn't going to go out, you know. And I think that at that time, at a different time in my life, I didn't have the understanding that that was okay. I didn't have permission to do that. Um, and so there was a part of me, of course, that would understand life without my eating disorder as incredibly, like I would have to show up to it. And I assumed I would have to show up in ways that I didn't want to be showing up. Again, I never gave myself permission to do otherwise. I think that a lot of mainstream norms have to do with the maintenance of eating disorders, like and you know what we're trying to actually escape or buffer. So yeah, one of the things about, you know, the way I coach recovery is that we are not starting out at intuitive eating, right? Like it's not, we don't just decide to eat intuitively and then we can. It's a whole process, and food is going to come with us along that way. So much of the work happens with the food. You know what I mean? It's not about, okay, let's take it away and learn how to cope with that. it's
Yeah,
it's more
because that
like,
feels like that kind of dieting part, right? It's like when you're dieting and say if you're binge eating or you're trying to lose weight, it's like you really kind of have to figure out how to sort of manage these unquote unquote like unwanted behavior. So this kind of, whereas I think when you really come at it from like how you work and probably how I work, it's like that curiosity is like, well, how is it functioning? And what's alongside this? And like you said, the food is coming alongside on the journey. Then there's more space to be
yeah,
curious about those things, right? Rather than, okay, let's figure out how you will not do that anymore, which feels like
right.
white knuckling and
Yeah.
really restrictive as well.
Yes, and it's interesting because that's the goal for everybody, right? It feels like I want to not eat so much, essentially. But the thought of not eating so much feels like a threat because it is. And so one of the ways I also think about binge eating is that I think that the binge to me, the part of me that binged was almost like the part of me that was fighting for myself and fighting for the parts of me that I did want to ostracize and cast away. And I started to look at it like, what if my inner binge eater, you know, is really asking for something, communicating something, standing up for something, granted, sometimes in a misguided way. But I think it was like kind of the part of me that said, no, no, I don't want to do it this way. I don't want to be in this size. I don't want to eat just those things. I don't want to feel like there's a ceiling over my head that you know, if I get too close, like, I want more than that, and I want more freedom than that. And I think that that's what the binge was always fighting for. And when I could take that part of me in instead of trying to push it out, well, that was almost like parts work there, where you're integrating yourself instead of, you know, ostracizing parts of you and telling yourself you know you're only acceptable if, or you're, you know, these are the conditions of your worth. That changed my relationship with food, but really with me. Like it changed the way I thought about myself, because I always thought it was me versus the enemy inside of me. And that was
Mm,
always going to cause this friction. And it was when I was like, wait a minute, this no is not about me. This is about what's out there and the ways that I'm oppressing myself. And I've internalized that oppression. What if I ally with myself and decide that the no is out there? And that changed the direction of shame, really. Because as long as
yeah.
I was fighting myself, it was shame.
Yeah. And again, it's like, I mean, what you just said there just feels so profound as well. It's like creating that relationship with oneself, because again, I think I always come back to this quote. I don't know who said it, but I know Judith Matt says something similar in her book in terms of like when we deny ourselves food, and it's like when we're physically hungry, it's like telling ourselves in real time that we're not worthy of care. And the opposite of that is really bringing it back and integrating into oneself. And I also feel like that particular quote comes back to some of that work that you do as well, and what you articulate on your Instagram page so wonderfully well. in terms of how food then also supports the nervous system regulation, both in maybe ways with binging that we think is really problematic, but also it can work, you know, well in that way too.
Well, this is the thing with that idea, right? Like this idea that when we're not feeding ourselves, that we're denying ourselves care. That's, I think for the restrictor, that makes sense. For the permitter and for those who identify as non-restrictors, the argument that I inevitably get on Instagram everywhere is I give myself all the food. How can you, like, by giving myself too much food constantly, how is that taking care of myself? You know what I mean? And it's actually, it feels like the opposite. And this is where I was like, oh, because I began as like the binge restrict mentality. I was like, it makes so much sense in this sphere, but what about this like cohort of people that kind of get left out of
Yeah.
that conversation? And then I was like, okay, what's the difference? And the difference to me was there is a difference between saying I allow myself to eat and I do allow myself that care versus I eat against my will. And so this idea that we're, that if you're binging all the time and you're permitting all this food, we're saying like, oh, but I'm allowing myself to eat, but we're not. It's the mental restriction. I mean, I don't know anybody who binges. Most people, 99% of the people that I work with who came to me from that place were absolutely cutting themselves down, the entire time. And it felt like you were just doing something you shouldn't have been doing. It wasn't like it was an act of self-care. It was almost like it was a surrender of power. And
Yes.
that's how it was felt. So of course that's dysregulation. And so is restriction. It comes from this dysregulated place of feeling like we're not safe in our own self. Whether we're restricting because of that lack of safety or whether we're binging because of that lack of safety, which is a different type of binging than the restriction response kind. I think it's about clarifying where something's coming from and understanding that that's where this idea of regulation came in. Is like if we're coming from a place of authentic, regulated sincerity of self, right? Like of really being not from a place of fear. That is the place from which we can choose, whether it's to choose to say yes to the food or to say no to the food. That became kind of like what I thought about as like the point. It was like it's really about getting yourself to a regulated state and being able to see more clearly from there. Because so many of us have become dysregulated and then we're making these choices and we're pathologizing the choices. But it's really about where the choices are coming from.
Yes. And and it's like that kind of sense, like, yeah, because that is the agency. So where they're, like you said, I can see, oh yeah, but I eat what I want. But if you continuously have the conversation, but I shouldn't, or I eat biscuits, but only three. And if I have the
Yeah.
fourth one, it's like it's bad. And there is that. And then I don't know if you see this also. And sometimes what happens then is like when people go all in, or they, move into like full permission, and then you do all of that and then it doesn't feel good because, you're eating a lot of stuff that maybe you weren't eating and your body's feeling uncomfortable. But then it's difficult. And what you just said is like the opposite side of that in terms of bringing the agency back home. It's like, but you can't, it's okay to say no also. It's
Right.
okay to say, yeah, I've had enough. Or today I don't feel like eating that cake because I want something else. Or it's a lovely day and I like an ice cream, but I don't like ice cream. I don't eat it during winter because it's cold,
Yeah.
So
Yes.
like and I feel like that often gets missed, or it's difficult to get to that if, well, like you have to sort of work on attunement and awareness and all the other pieces of why this is happening, like what you were talking about before. It's like how is it functioning? How is the binging function? How is the rebelling against oneself functioning, or where is the kind
Yeah.
of container for safety? But it's there's an equal part of being able, and I've seen you articulate this so lovely again, like to be able to say no, and for that to be okay, that you're not like to feel safe to say no also. It's like, oh yeah,
Yes. Yes, I think that that's the biggest misconception, that if you're not restricting, that you're always saying yes and that you don't have the right to say no. And I again meet a fair amount of people who say, I feel In fact, I had a client, or someone that I met with yesterday who is becoming a client, who said the reason I need help is because I feel full. I feel like I've eaten enough. I feel like I've allowed myself these things, but I'm afraid to say no. I'm afraid that it's restriction. And I think this isn't something you can like sort of figure out on in the social media posts, because it's like, okay, well, it can be restriction. um, Sometimes saying no to food is absolutely restriction, and sometimes it's not. And it depends on the amount of, it depends on the place we're coming from. It depends on the regulation in the system. And it also depends on the judgment and what's going on in our thoughts around that, and the deconstruction and the felt sense of safety that we have in ourselves. Like, there was a time, when I first recovered, I ate French toast for breakfast always, or cereal, or I only wanted like fun foods. I had no desire for nutritional considerations. And I did that for a long time because I needed to establish those foods as safe, and I needed to establish those foods as allowed. And I needed to kind of get over the stigma that I had about them, and the idea that the sky would fall if I ate them too much. But eventually, like, that led to me being able to make the choices, because once the stigma and once the energy of it kind of dissipated, and that was like predicated upon my own true allowing, right? Like, that the fear was going, I wasn't afraid to be eating these things. And again, the readiness was there. Um, that's where I started to understand, oh, I also have a choice to say no, but you can't have a choice to say no if you've never said yes wholeheartedly. You know what I mean? Like, if you haven't
Yes.
really been with the yes. You say
Yeah.
yes, but you're flagging your finger at the whole time. That's not really
Yeah.
saying yes. So I had to say yes for a while, really truly say yes. And again, that's an X factor of readiness. But
Yeah.
once I was able to do that long enough, that's what allowed me to say, okay, I understand. I can say yes now. I really get it now. And it took me like 9 months to a year to really feel that. But I can also maybe say no, and understanding the times where a yes was when I wanted to do which one. And that was a whole journey for me. And that was a lot about where gentle nutrition was for me, is figuring out when is it okay. So it's okay to actually order a salad sometimes. I thought that was just for restrictors, and be like, no, when I want it, I actually want it, and that's also okay. um,
Yeah.
but you can't just arrive there. You don't just start at that place.
No, I think it is important to do that face of like permission and really honor that and eat the stuff. And then often I think people then can get stuck there, like, or they think they're there, but they're continuously judging themselves. But then to be able to move beyond that to that place of choice, and to be able to say no, or nah, not right now. And
Yeah.
it's okay. And I think about it even in terms of like hunger and fullness. It's like it's much easier to stop eating when you're full, when you know the food is going to be available again next
Yeah.
time you're asking for it. And even from I'm curious how you feel about this, but one of the things that I think about a lot is in that terms of when we are continuously responding with food, when we're physically hungry, even when we think like, oh, I should be full now. Like that, yesterday I had the same amount of food and that was fine, but
Yeah.
today I'm hungry. And when you're continuously doing that over time, you are building that, like it's a reciprocal act in like conversing with your body and building trust between you and your body. And that tends to
Yes.
have that kind of effect on that all of a sudden you eat something and you're kind of it feels like maybe too much, but it's not a binge because you can stop and it's like, oh, I was actually really hungry. I think about that
Yeah.
sometimes when I've had like a full bag of like chips, or we say crisps, for lunch because I was really hungry,
Yeah.
right? And I don't like, it's like, yeah, I was hungry. That wasn't maybe the most nutritious lunch or whatever, but it was fine. But there would have been a time when that was not fine, when that was a huge problem,
Yes.
you know?
Yes. I would say I think about that almost every day. I think about how, if that respect for my hunger wasn't there, I don't know I would be I couldn't stay recovered, because It was the pathologizing of that and the fear of that that would make me what I call meta binge or meta eating, like where, because, we are taught to eat a certain portion, right? That there's a certain portion that's allowed or acceptable or normal. And my appetite is bigger than that. It just is. Like I am, and I've always been like that since I was a child. I've never been somebody who just eats like a bird. Like I'm just not. So I needed to eat more food than my, I don't know, my peers or whoever. And I always thought that that was a sign of gluttony and it was a sign of too muchness, but it was really because my hunger asked for it. Like that's what my appetite calls for. And so every time I would go over this like amount that I saw was normal, it was like, "Oh, there you go again, and immediately the guilt and shame would start. And then I would keep eating because of that guilt and shame. Now what happens, it's so interesting to watch it, is like sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm really, and my body likes to eat a lot more of its food in the first half to 2/3 of the day than the last, which is so interesting because I used to be such a night eater. But I actually get quite hungry in the morning and the afternoon, and I don't really in the evening as much. Um, and I will eat like a big breakfast, and then I might need a little bit more sometimes. And then I have it, and then I'm like, oh yeah, and then I get this register of that. Like my stomach's like, we're good, we're good. But I know that before I would have completely missed that because at that point I would have already been like, you've blown this day. You've already eaten this much. It's not even lunchtime. It's over. And then I would just keep going and keep going. And now it's like those signals of fullness come loud and clear to me in a way that I never had access to before. And I'm like, oh, I'm fine. I don't need to keep eating because this is not emotional eating. This is not gluttonous eating. This was an appetite call. And that's why I'm getting this cue back that it's finished now. But I just couldn't before because I assumed that I'd already blown something.
Yeah, and I think that's so common. And because we have an idea of what a normal portion should look like, or what one is supposed to be sustained on. And particularly if, you've been actively trying to lose weight or control your body size for a long time, that gets even more kind of conflated with that. So, but it comes then with being ready, I think, to what you said initially, to let go of trying to control our bodies and allow them to do what they need to do. And that is also a big piece of the work, to arrive in that feeling, and that's kind of bringing us back to where we started in, like, where sometimes maybe when people when that feels too overwhelming early on in the work, that maybe there's other things that needs to be in place or worked on alongside that or before, because the felt sense of safety isn't there for that to land.
Yeah, and I always want to say this, that well, two things. One is that because I was a binge restrictor for so long, I had suppressed my body weight, more than where it wanted to be. But I wasn't a small person. I was, I was like a mid-sized person. I wasn't looking ill, quote unquote. But still, it was a suppression. And when I recovered, I gained weight above and beyond where I even am now, right? Like I needed it. My body wanted, and what I just described about reaching that appetite threshold, I needed more and more. I needed way more then than I need now. That appetite cue wouldn't come in. That satiation cue wouldn't come in for until much more food was eaten in the beginning. So it can feel like you're actually out of control at first, and you're gaining all this weight, and it doesn't look yet like some kind of stable place, because after restriction there is this period of time where the body like has a call for much more food than you end up needing in the end, but there's this period of time where that's occurring. That's the first thing that I wanted to say, that it until your body feels comfortable, it will be asking for quite a lot of food, and that doesn't last forever, but it does last for some time. The other thing though is that I still landed in a mid-sized body, so I don't feel comfortable telling somebody who's in a bigger body than me, like, it's fine. You know what I mean? It's fine. You can find safety here, because I feel like that's a privileged thing to say.
Yeah.
And I don't have the experience of saying, well, now I've sort of I can't shop at stores. And then I've had clients who've said, like, these are the things I'm now dealing with, mobility issues and stigma at the doctor's office and not being able to shop in certain stores. Like my clothing choices are limited and just general trolling and, work discrimination and things. That wasn't part of my experience. So of course it was easier for me to find safety. Now, it wasn't easy for me to find safety, and I don't have a privileged small body. So I do understand it still was hard, but it wasn't as hard. And safety is on a spectrum. So I one of the things that I always recommend is if you're somebody who's feeling like your body size is putting you in an unsafe, is giving you a feeling of like a lack of safety to the degree where like the social world is part of that. It's not just our personal opinions about what we need to look like, but we're actually feeling unsafe in the world. One of the, I think, I don't know what else to do except to say, we need to be looking towards people who are in bodies that are similar to ours. Because like I said in the beginning, that part was actually what I think was the motivation of change for me, is understanding that there were other people doing what I was doing and I wasn't alone. And I think that's important for all of us, like to understand that whatever our situation is, that we find people who can match up with that, because that is that camaraderie, or that even just the safety of like, there is somebody else doing this with me or has done this before and they're okay, or they figured out ways of navigating it and they can speak to this and they have compassion for that and they can hold my hand even virtually that way, is everything to our nervous system, right? Like, because safety comes from connection. And I really feel strongly about, finding lived experience out there, and the same lived experience that you've got, because that's really what safety comes from, is knowing that we're not alone in that experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I, again, like, recognize my own body privilege in that, and that it is very different when weight gain or somebody's starting place or the desire to lose weight or keep that going is, creating or buffering against discrimination and stigma in the world. Like, that's, and like, yes, I have not had that experience myself personally either. So I think for those of us who are practitioners in smaller bodies, even if we're not small, but like in mid-size
Right.
or whatever, but that don't, have bodies that still sort of roughly, um, you know, gives a certain amount of privilege, to be able to find places where we can, support people to find that additional support with people of similar experiences and who maybe have found a way of navigating some of those additional challenges, and how you can, how you can still heal, but it is going to look different, and it does come with another layer of challenges and
Yeah.
unfortunate circumstances, which I really wish we didn't have, but they would be very ignorant to say that they don't exist, because they do very much.
Yeah. And also to note that, like, I've worked with clients in bodies bigger than mine who have absolutely recovered, and who have faced those challenges and felt like, yeah, I'm and again, trauma is going to be an intersection too, and there's other intersections there, but like, it's not a stopgap. It can be. I mean, it's a factors to consider, but I have worked with people in very small bodies and in very large bodies and in the middle. And of all of the groups, there are some people who are absolutely paralyzed by the fear and can't, or feel they need additional resources to continue. And I've also had worked with people in all of those groups who did it without
Yeah.
those additional resources. It just depends on the individual.
Exactly. Yeah, I would say the same. And again, I think knowing then, like, if there is intersection with trauma, yeah, and knowing that if that's or additional resources, I think it's really helpful. So
Yeah.
I know, Stephanie, we could probably talk forever, and like, there's so many things that I could ask you or whatever. But one of the questions I always ask people is, what is joyful nourishment to you?
Joyful nourishment. So, whenever I hear the word nourish or nourishment, I think like the go-to is like food. And that is absolutely part of my experience of what nourishment is. But recovery has taught me that it's more than that. And one of the practices that I adopted, I guess, as I was in training for somatic therapy is kind of what I'm just doing right now, which is slowing down a little bit, sitting back a little bit. I'm noticing the muscles in my shoulders and back and stomach, and even in my arms and legs a little bit relax. And just noticing that I'm having a nice time in this conversation, and it's Friday and I feel glad about that. And there's just like a moment of, I guess it could be called glimmer moments, right? Of noticing what's okay and what's safe and what's easy, and taking that in. And to me, that's been the most, I guess, right now in my life, the most impactful point of nourishment is just taking a minute to feel the safety around me, and letting that in to my nervous system more and more. That feels like it feeds a lot of things.
Thank you. That's a beautiful way of thinking about nourishment as well. And I personally like the question because, again, like we think about food, but I also think about when somebody is in recovery and further along in their recovery, like life tends to become so much richer and fuller, and like, so the physical nourishment feeds into the emotional, spiritual life nourishment as well. There's more life. There's more nourishment, and then we can feed ourselves in different ways as well. So thank you so much for this lovely conversation. And just as we wrap up, where can people find you? And I will also link to that in the show notes.
Sure. Yeah. So my website is IamStephanieMichele.com, and I am Stephanie Michele on all on Instagram and Facebook, and I have a Life After Diets podcast as well, that I co-host with Sarah Dosanjh. So any of those spots you can
Brilliant.
find me.
Yeah, so we'll link to those. And again, I would definitely recommend people to go and check out your Instagram and your podcast, because it's a fantastic resource, I think, in this space, particular people who are struggling with binge eating.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. The Joyful Nourishment podcast is produced with no financial backing, and your support means a lot to keep this project going. If this episode has been helpful in any way, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on. This helps the podcast to be found by others. And of course, you can also forward this episode to a friend whom you think may benefit. Find out more about what I offer on straightforwardnutrition.com, and if you're interested in working with me, please use the link in the show notes to book in for a free initial 30-minute session. And finally, please come and join the Joyful Nourishment community over on Substack, unless you're there already, by subscribing to my newsletter using the link below.